What's going on, everybody, and welcome to Challenge Accepted. I'm Thomas, and I'm here with Frank.
Hey, hey.
We got a very special guest back on the podcast. We got John,
Hey, guys.
and we are doing an awesome episode, a two-part episode from Star Trek, Season 4, Episode 8, called The Year of Hell. And this was my first time watching a Star Trek show. I got some thoughts. I hope you like me after this. Let's say that.
Already, Jonathan and I'm sure Jonathan too, is kind of chomping at the bit because he didn't say Star Trek Voyager.
Yeah.
Oh,
Is that right?
oh, my bad. Dang. What a rookie mistake. Yeah, Star Trek Voyager, my bad. And yeah, I don't know. I have some thoughts. Like I said, I've never watched a Star Trek show, but you know, it had some things that I thought were pretty cool, but there were some things that I think just went completely over my head. And I'm looking forward to this, so hopefully you can like fill in those things for me.
You watched the J.J. Abrams movies, though, right?
I did, yeah. I like those
All
movies.
three, or just the first one?
I think all three. I'm not gonna lie, I might have fell asleep in the third one.
Oh no! Oh man, these two
Yeah.
boys.
So
coming back.
what other sci-fi shows do you like that might be comparable to this?
That's a good
based it on?
question. I mean, big Star Wars fan. I've watched every Star Wars movie show. I'm trying to think of the Matrix, Stargate. I never watched the Stargate shows. I've watched the movies. So it just has its own feel to it.
Okay.
You know,
It
it-
definitely
it-
does.
yeah, and I like that. It's interesting, but I definitely didn't feel like I was in on the jokes or like the little tidbits. You know, I
Yeah.
was trying to figure it all out.
And that was one thing we did debate about choosing an episode like this. It's not one that introduces the characters. It's one that kind of breaks your heart for what's already been developed in the characters. So, it's definitely for Voyager fans, but it's a fun one to review, but probably not the best one to be someone's like first episode ever. To really get them hooked.
If you're
All
to look
right,
up
that makes a lot of
rankings,
sense.
it's always number 2 because Endgame, which is the finale of the
Mm-hmm.
series, is number 1 all the time. It's so freaking perfect. But that too would be hard to show you because then you're like, "What are the Borgs?" And you're like, "It's so important right now."
Yeah, but
and
for
then,
real,
yeah.
what are the Borgs? Because I
Yeah.
don't know what those are either. Yeah.
Oh man, someday I'll challenge you to more Star Trek series, by the way. So just get ready
There
for
you
that.
go.
I'll make sure
Alright.
there's a Borg in one of them.
Right on.
We'll probably do the Warf. Oh, the cutest episode for next gen. Oh my god, here we go. But yeah, so let's go ahead and get started on this before we get too far. I'm gonna do the rundown for us because I got the notes for it, and it shouldn't be too hard. I made sure to do bullet points because I had a feeling I might be doing the rundown for this one. Here we go. Got the timer and go. Voyager runs into an aggressive Krenim ship. They're about to approach Krenim space. I'll explain the intro a little later. The Krenims they're saying that there's a war going on, and they're real jerks about it. The Zal are the most powerful species at this time, and they give Voyager freedom of movement in their space. They say, "Oh yeah, go across. They seem hella cool." A ship near the Zal homeworld sends out a temporal wave. We're going to refer to this as the time ship as we go forward. There might be a real name, but that's what I've always called it. By the way, the villain I'm going to call Red a lot, so get ready for that soon.
That's all I could think the whole time.
This Krenim ship's time wave changes the time as it goes through, and in this new timeline, the Krenim are the strongest species, and the Zal are, I believe, non-existent. Yeah, they're non-existent. And the temporal weapon goes right through the shields of Voyager. So later on, we see that the Krenim are trying to restore a timeline that they preferred. And this one gave them a 98%, but it was not enough. Voyager at this point is falling apart, and as we go through, there's like days and days going by. So around day 47, temporal warhead is actually found in the side of Voyager. They use that to make shielding. Oh my god, my time's just going by so fast.
Yeah.
Voyager has temporal shields, and now when the Krenim use their time wave, it bounces off of their shields and changes the timeline a lot. Now Krenim are like pre-warp garbage people. So they approach Voyager, say, "Hey, what the hell?" They steal Chakotay and Tom. Oh my god.
And part
the
2.
Krenim ship. Red likes Chakotay. Tom's being a jerk. Janeway is desperate. She ends up eventually ramming the ship into the Krenim ship, and that's it. Gosh, dang it. That was the hardest one yet.
I know. That's yeah. I
Should've
was
got
like,
double time because it's a two-parter.
absolutely. See, I asked for
Right?
that. Well, I asked for that one time too, and he's like, I don't know, we'll see. So,
I was
yeah,
jacked up with that. I think
Yeah.
I gave you 3 minutes on that one though.
yeah.
So,
But you made it work, and you kind of. It's hard because there's a lot of fundamental things that I feel like they're setting up in part 1, right? There's
Oh,
Yeah.
you know, you guys probably see it and think, okay, for the first, like part one is like status quo, but now they've kind of run into an enemy where maybe their technology is a little bit more advanced than they're used to. It's a different type of weapon too. I mean, just the fact that it's like altering time, and you can probably speak to this better, but I kept thinking of Red or the Anorax villain, I think was his name, or was his name Anorax?
Anorax, yeah.
Anorax.
Yeah, I kept thinking of him as like Kang almost. Because the way he was looking at time in the discussion, but I think that was more in part two, it was like, this guy has like future tech and looks at time differently. It reminds me of King.
I always think of him as I thought about him during this time as Thrawn. We've been talking a lot about Thrawn, but he's also like this guy who's like he's thinking at a higher tier than everybody around him. It feels like, and he's just like even when his associate who's been with him for 200 years. At that point, they've been on the ship for 200 years. It's outside of time and space, so they do not age at all. They can attempt as many times as they want to. When he goes and approaches him, he's like, you still don't see that, you know, time doesn't mean anything to us. Like, even his assistant, who's been doing this for 200 years, doesn't quite think like he does. And Chakotay seems to be the only one that kind of does. So
Right. Okay, that makes so much sense. I was like, wait, okay, the 200 years, but they don't, like, time isn't passing. I was so confused about that, but I got it. Now they're not aged because they're not aging because they're outside of literally like time.
yeah,
And with
Got it.
them being on their ship, like when they have an incursion where they change time around them, you know, nothing on their ship changes. So when they he's been saving relics from all these other civilizations, and they don't
Also
disappear. Yeah, they don't disappear. till
Okay,
everything
that
else
makes
does.
sense. I was like, how can he take all these little knickknacks and then, you know, see this? You know, they're having the meal and he's like, you're eating all this food from a lost civilization. And I'm like, how does that work? Because, but he brought it on the ship and the ship is, you know, like, cancels out the time change.
Yeah.
yeah, and
Got
like
it.
Thrawn will collect a piece of art before wiping out a society. That's
Yeah.
what this guy's doing too.
And meanwhile,
okay.
their other ships that are attacking Voyager are using those temporal weapons. So it's not that they're changing time around Voyager, but their torpedoes or their bombs are in an altered state of time. They're fluctuating through time, so they'll be at Voyager's shields and then change to a time where Voyager's not there. So they pass through the shields at a different time, and then they reappear.
What?
They reappear next to the
Welcome to
ship
Star Trek.
when it's present. So,
Okay, that's crazy. I didn't even understand that. And
yeah, they're in a state
she
of
was-
temporal flux.
Right, 7 of 9. You guys got to explain that to me as well. But so
Classic.
7 and 9 goes in there with the temporal torpedo on the side, and she's like trying to figure out some type of like coordination or something so that they can disarm it properly, or so, I don't know. But I was like, wait, what?
The big puzzle piece is they can't create shielding for the shield. There's shields on the ship that block it from asteroids and normal phaser fire and everything like that. But they can't create temporal shielding unless they can figure out the frequency that the torpedoes are coming in at, because it'll know when how they're shifting in time. Then it could shift the shields in time as well. So that's why they need a sample basically of one of the unexploded torpedoes, which is what she finds in the ship, and it was worth the effort because then they can get the frequency. She's walking away, and like Tuvok is saying, like, you gotta go. And she's like, we have to get the number. And then she's like remembering some random 4-digit number, but that's the frequency that'll make the shield shift alongside with the torpedoes as well, making them
That's
invulnerable.
crazy. Okay, now I understand it, and that's a wild concept. I appreciate you explaining that. Weird thing about that situation, because then it does explode, and it doesn't kill them, but it blinds Tuvok. How does that work? Like, or is that one of those things? Is like, don't think too much about that.
Yeah, don't think too. You could maybe, if you want to like pretend, say that was the like the spark powder, like that was the ignition, but without the warhead. Like the warhead didn't detonate. That's what I try to tell myself to make sense out of that. Because inside the ship, you have a bomb go off, it's gonna take out a whole deck.
Right.
Which we saw them do already in that exact episode when they when the doctor shut the door. That was a warhead that just like detonated an entire level of the ship. So it was like, okay, and Tuvok survived this, blind or not, you know?
Yeah.
Oh man.
Wild. Okay. So I kind of want to start closer to the beginning because the whole point of this, like you guys were saying, and I don't know if we were talking about this offline, is that we get to see a change from how the crew is normally to, by the end of part 2, you know, they're kind of back there, but we get to see them at their lowest levels. Can you tell me like a little bit more about it at the start of like day 1 or like day 4 of like what we're seeing?
Yeah, Jonathan, can you kind of explain the concept of Voyager in comparison to the rest of Star Trek and how it differs? And then,
Oh, yeah.
like,
Basically,
basically what
explain
leads us
all
to
of Star Trek to me.
Yeah, right. But, like, what leads us to day one of this episode?
Yeah, so what's unique about Voyager is they got launched by some alien technology 70,000 light years away from Earth. So now they're a 70-year journey for them to get home, and they've only been at it for 4 years. I think they get a couple shortcuts here and there, but it's not till the end, final episode, they get a major shortcut to get them back. But so
Wow.
in this, they're going through all unexplored space, and they're meeting all these different alien races that have never interacted with humans before with the Federation. So that's where, like, in this, they're trying to just make a straight line as good as possible to get home, and they're going through alien territories. They got to negotiate and try to find ways. Sometimes they have a massive nebula that they just can't avoid. They have to go around it, and it's going to be an extra year or two on their journey. But in this kind of case, it's like, well, if we can make peace with these people, maybe we'll have an exchange of resources, or we'll learn some technology and learn about their culture, because they are an exploratory ship. So they want to learn as much as they can along the way. But then we've almost every episode, it's like, oh yeah, this alien race, wants to kill us.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Right on. Okay. That makes a lot more sense. And also, it kind of differentiates this, I guess, this version of Star Trek from some of the other ones, right?
Yeah, so normally in Star Trek, you have a crew that's like, okay, so the baseline of Star Trek is you're going to go out there, you're going to maintain peace in the Federation, which is a organization that manages multiple planets together: Vulcans, humans, Klingons, etc. Many, many, many.
Gotcha.
And so, like, the main gimmick, like the original Star Trek, was there's a 5-year mission where they had to go and explore, like, the edges and push the edges out a little bit more. There are borders with, like, war tribe Romulans and stuff like that, but that's the general idea. You move forward, Next Generation's basically doing the same thing, but 100 years forward in the timeline. And Next Generation, which is your one with, like, Picard, so Patrick Stewart, stuff like that, big actors, and it was kind of the thing that brought back Star Trek into the mainstream. It had two sort of spin-off series. One was Deep Space Nine, which is, okay, now what if one of the outposts had its own storyline and own show? That's called Deep Space Nine. And then Voyager, it's like, what if we were to take one of these ships, fling it to the other side of the galaxy, so now you don't recognize any of the aliens.
Yeah.
And what's a little extra spice on there too is there's a rebel group within the Federation called the Maquis, which think that the Federation's a little too strict, and when they get flung out there, they get flung out there with a group of Maquis. So now they're merged on the ship. So this is like 4 years into their journey. So now the Maquis and them are well bound together. Chakotay, matter of fact, is the head of the Maquis, and that's her second in command. So it's really kind of a family more than any other ship we've seen in Star Trek up to this date.
Wow. Okay, that's pretty cool. I just like Chakotay. His demeanor is really cool. He just seems cool, calm, and collected. The face tattoo is badass. I mean, I was like, okay, I want to know more about this guy, and that's awesome.
Now he represents Native. Is it Native Americans, John? Because he's not actually from Earth, I think. It's a bit of a question mark. If you look it up online, nobody really knows.
Yeah, during the show, I always thought he was a Native American-like race of an alien planet. But I think afterwards, we find out now that he is supposed to be just a Native American, and that's his, modern way of connecting with his culture and stuff, is just how his culture evolved into the future.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's Mesoamerican to be just a slightly more narrowed down to where it's at. I think at the convention actually is where we were kind of getting some answers to that, because he actually spoke at a convention that we were at.
Right.
Actually, all of these people basically did except for Janeway.
Nice.
Yeah, and so he's a really cool character. And then, is there any character you have questions about? I think that's our best way to go
do
forward.
a deep dive on one character.
Yeah, there is that one alien who makes the cocktail of all the amino acids or whatever. It gave me a very Matrix kind of feel when they were having breakfast with the oats and then trying to say what it tasted like. Well, in this one, they're all like, this is disgusting. And he's like, I think they were calling it like ration packs. Like, what is that guy? What type of alien?
So he's Neelix. He is a Talaxian. And so when Voyager first got stranded, and they're trying to make their way back, they needed somebody that they helped save him and his girlfriend pretty much at the time. And so they needed somebody to kind of be a guide or that knows the area a little bit. And he was kind of a trader. He would
pirate.
Pirate, scavenger. He would
Yeah.
kind of hoard junk and then try to sell it. So Janeway offered to take him along. So he has always been very gracious and appreciative to Janeway and a really good member of the team, though he doesn't have the technical training that anybody else has. So he's been the cook on the ship. He has more roles than anybody else. So he's the primary role is the cook. He's also the morale
He's the
officer.
multi-tool.
And what's his third role? Cook, morale
He
officer.
becomes an ambassador.
Ambassador. That's right. He's official ambassador.
Right on.
So yeah, he's great. He's kind of funny and quirky and always like
Optimistic
jabbing at
all the time.
jabbing at Tom and Tuvok. But him and
Yeah.
Tuvok play well together because Tuvok's just the straight guy, very serious. I mean, he's Vulcan, and so the two of them always are oil and vinegar, and just it's fun to see them play off each other so well. They often get paired together.
Vulcans, he doesn't know Vulcans. Vulcans they have emotions, but they train their entire society into not sharing emotions at all.
Right.
So,
okay. So yeah, like
they're logically above all thing else.
Exactly. So they're like what Spock is, right? I mean, that's Spock's race. He's
You watched the
Vulcan.
movies. There you go, Spock.
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
Spock.
And
Yeah.
they always criticize Spock because he was half human, half Vulcan, right?
Yeah.
And then he got into fights and all that, and it's like you're not supposed to show emotion. All right, I got it. I got like Tuvok was like, okay, Tuvok's like Spock because he does the hand thing at the end too.
Yeah.
At the end of
Which
part
is
one.
a big moment because I don't think he's ever done that in the show to that point.
And he's saying he's not
Really?
saying see you later. He's saying goodbye, my old friend. Like he expects Janeway's gonna die.
Oh, that scene hits so different
Yeah.
right now.
And
that
they
makes so much
they've been
sense.
together so much longer than any other pair in the ship. So
And he was implanted with the Maquis. So when the Maquis came out there, he was the spy that was basically ratting on them the whole time. And come to find out, he and Janeway had been best friends for a long time before that. And so all of a sudden it was like, "What up, bro? You're our pilot," And it's like, "No, actually, I'm her best friend, and we grew up together in the academy."
Oh
Son of
my
a bitch.
gosh! Wow,
He's
that must
awesome.
have been like a big twist.
yeah.
For the Maquis, that was the first episode.
In
Though,
the
so
very
after that,
beginning,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Gotcha. And now you're setting up their relationship. Okay, that makes a ton of sense. Do we see Tuvok? I guess that was the big change for him, right? What about Captain Janeway? Like, it seems like she's very confident. She knows her crew. She knows what she needs to do, and we kind of see her break down a little bit as the days go on. Like part one, she's very, very solid, but at the end, she tells her family, the rest of the crew, like, if I ask you to stay, it means I'm asking you to die, and so I don't want you to do that. You guys take off. What do you guys think about her transition from the captain to what we see in these two episodes?
Yeah, she's exactly as you expect her to be as you've gotten to know her through the show. She's all or nothing. I'm going to go down with the ship. Often she'll make very risky judgment calls where she'll like risk her entire crew to save some alien race or something like that, but it's always, a million people or a whole planet's going to die if we don't jump in and fight. But to see how desperate she gets, where towards the end she even breaks chain of command by telling the doctor, like, I don't care what you're saying, you can't confine me to the brig. I'm gonna keep fighting as long as I can fight. Just give me trioxylene, and I'm gonna keep going. And I was like, damn, that's usually she'll walk the line of breaking command, but usually doesn't step over it. And that was where she's like, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and break the rules because I have to possibly keep my people alive.
Got it.
Matter of fact, so there's two things I want to bring up on that one. So when they got thrown out 70 years ago, they had a chance to use that machine to go back. But if she did that, it would have killed the society. So she's like, all right, then we're adding 70 years to our journey. We'll probably won't see the end of it. Our kids will finish it for us. And she blew up the machine that brought them there.
And countless other ships might have been pulled the same way they were by that array.
So they wouldn't have been the last ones. So that kind of shows you, like, but in that same sense, like her crew, she's checked with them a few times on this kind of thing, and they're behind her 100% because she is, in my opinion, the best captain of Star Trek. That's definitely, talk about if you want to get a debate going. That's definitely debatable for everybody else. But
Yeah, you're getting some hate mail in your inbox now.
Yeah.
right. The other thing is the doctor she's talking to, he's actually a holographic program who on day one, when they got thrown out there, their doctor died. A lot of people died because it was a massive battle. So their doctor died, and he's the backup emergency doctor that comes up, which is meant to run for like an hour or two, or until you can get back to. It's not meant to last for 70 years. So when the program's been on for that long, he's basically learned to evolve, and become more and more human every time. And so since then, and she's at the point where she's encouraging, like, explore humanity. And she's doing it with 7 of 9 too. We'll talk about her in a bit. But she's kind of encouraging, like, explore humanity and see what the limits of your programming is. Matter of fact, he has a thing on his arm called the mobile emitter that lets him leave the room that he was in, where the cameras used to make him emit. So the fact that she says, I'll shut you off, is basically saying, I'll strip your humanity from you, which is something that, as somebody who watched the show up to that point, was like, whoa, you do not cross that line. That's crazy.
Right.
So yeah,
That's like saying, she's gonna just take away his humanity then at that point, right? Wow. Okay, that makes a ton of sense, because the whole time I'm like, what's up with this dude? He's so weird. And I just didn't understand. I was like, the way he says things and everything is just a little off.
And what's funny is comparing him to Data. So Data was an android, like a half robot from the series before this.
Right.
And he had no emotion and was learning about humanity. But I think they intentionally made the Doctor overly reactive and emotional. He was programmed to simulate emotions as much as he can to have a better bedside manner with his patients. And so we see from day one, he seems like he has emotions, though he doesn't really understand people or, social situations well and stuff like that. So as the show goes on, he starts to evolve and learn about humanity, and it actually teaches humanity to 7 of 9 and how to be, a person. So
interesting.
Cool.
He has that moment where he has to shut the hatch, on those few crew member, and then they end up dying. And he seems pretty emotional about that. I would have never guessed he was like a holograph turned like into something real, or a real boy, if you will.
Well, what's important about that moment too is the fact that before that, like when he first got turned on, and again he's just there for a moment, the choosing of life and death is very triage. Like, you have the most survivability by percentage, so I'm going with you. So when he's like having a hard time closing that hatch, it shows that he's grown beyond that programming to where he's like, but these are my friends. And so it hurts to have to just like, you gotta die, and shuts the door. And if he didn't do that, the people who got through before him would have died with him. So it would have been, matter of fact, the only person who would have survived would have been him, because he has the mobile emitter. He's fine in space.
Wow, that is crazy. That gives whole new context when he gets in the argument with Tom Paris, I think. Yeah, and he's like, you're not prioritizing. Like, she's fine, but is she dying? No, so let's move on. And that conversation, I was like, why is he just being a dick? Like, let him help his friend.
He's trying to go back to his earlier programming.
Exactly. That's why. That makes a ton of sense.
He's probably now trying to suppress emotions that he didn't have before, because he's trying to think logically and focus on the work.
I love this show.
Isn't that great? Right. And so Tom, the person that he's trying to help, is actually his wife. I think they're married already at that part, right? At that point.
Yeah, but matter of fact, she's pregnant at that point too.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Even more
adds a lot of depth to why he's focusing on her and ignoring other people at the time.
Yeah, for sure. I thought he maybe had a crush on her or whatever, because I don't think he mentions wife at all. And that makes a ton of sense. Even more so, it's like, why are you yelling at me to go take care of this other person? I'm taking care of my wife on top of it. That's nuts. Okay, got that.
The last character I think we need to explain for sure is 7 of 9. So she was Borg, and the Borg are a species, quote unquote, that are bionic. So they have like these micro bots or whatever that converts them into these half human, half cyborg, or half whatever, and half cyborg creatures that all share a hive mind, led by a queen. And their whole thing, and literally my computer, by the way, glows green, and on the top says resistance is futile. That's their saying. When they show up to somebody, when they show up to a ship, they're like, you are going to join the Borg, get it out, resistance is futile. And they assimilate, and the idea is they're going to assimilate the entire galaxy and make them perfect like them. And they're always going to gain, so every time they assimilate a new society, they gain more knowledge about how they did things, like they do irrigation differently or whatever, and that becomes part of everybody's knowledge. And so they lose humanity, they lose any sort of sense of individualism. She was a human girl that was kidnapped when she was a girl, or simulated when she was a girl, and is the first, if I'm not mistaken, outside of Locutus, but that's a sticky situation, is the first person to be brought back from the Borg to the humanity side. And that's why it's slow to kind of teach her what it is to be a human. And like, she knows how to do Borg tech, which means like in the beginning when they opened up the astrometrics lab, which is a big deal too, she's like, oh yeah, it's part of the Borg technology. It's because it's part of a hive of mind that spans the entire galaxy. So it really is a great map, stuff like that. So she too is learning humanity, even though she used to be human.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. That's what a crazy concept. I mean, yeah, it's just wild. Well, as like being kidnapped as a kid and trained, it kind of reminds me of Spartans, from Halo a little bit.
Yes.
Except for, yeah, it's literally taking over your thoughts. But then the hive mind concept is just interesting for humans, right? I mean, we've kind of seen
it's
it
so
with
cool. Yeah.
The Last of Us and the Cordyceps, but yeah, it sounds like Star Trek was one of those places where they may have done it first in shows.
Yeah.
It's really cool whenever they talk because they always say like, we do this, we do that. Like it's all one person
Yeah.
talking for the Borg, but it's actually like billions behind them.
And
And
when
they
you-
all like their ships are not like ship shaped like you'd expect. They're like squares or spheres because that's efficient, and stuff like that. So.
And when you hear them talk or think, it's it's only probably like 10 people, but they make it sound like it's 1,000 voices speaking together, thinking together. It's pretty cool. Also, it's nanoprobes is the technology. Got to make sure to say
Nanoprobes.
that for
Thank you,
everyone
John.
who's smashing their phone against the wall.
Yeah. Do you even trek, bro? But yeah, I could see. Yeah, these concepts are so crazy, and it's kind of blowing my mind, and I love it. It's so creative. You're right where I'm like, dang it, I kind of wish I knew this going into it, but now I could go back and watch it and have like this better insider knowledge and appreciate where everybody's coming from without knowing it. Like some of these scenes, like just hearing you guys talk about it now for me is just making it so much better. It's crazy.
We might have to change how we do the show to where we like challenge each other to the first and last episode of a series or something like that.
No, I like this, dude. Honestly, it's refreshing to really not know about something and then kind of discover it and hear you guys and hear how passionate you guys are about it and how knowledgeable. It's like, whoa, this is really cool. And these concepts, it's just pretty amazing that they exist in like one property. It's pretty cool. So, okay, by the end of it, Captain Janeway says, hey, crew, or part one, they're like, hey, you guys all leave. She says that she can track the rest of the crew by, I don't know, some type of
Space.
some type of tracker. They're down to bare bones, right? I'm guessing the bare bones crew that we see are the ones that are in the program always, right? Which is like
They're the actual stars of the show. Yeah, yeah.
Definitely. We also get to see again Anorax, I think, and Chakotay kind of discuss the whole concept of how they view time, right? And again, for me, this is I think I understand what you're saying about the Thrawn part of it, but the Kang where time is irrelevant, and I'll keep changing time so I can get exactly what I want, which is I want 100%, and I want this colony to come back, and that colony has my wife. And that was a really interesting thing too, because now he's putting his whole crew through hundreds of years, so to speak, of this nightmare and this mission that they may never be able, like it may never be possible to actually happen. And I love that. Can you guys talk about that conversation between Chakotay and Anorax?
Yeah, I love that because it shows Anorax his passion, but he's also, it's like he's slipping a little mentally. He's getting a little paranoid, believing that time has these emotions and that he could see it. And he's so, like, he could see it so clearly. But, as far as we understand the science of time, and Chakotay kind of believes him or wants to believe him and is so interested in this technology, how it's kind of an art of changing time the way he does it.
Yeah, like Chakotay is like almost on his side a little bit. When Tom comes in, he's like, he's not fully crazy. Like he's still trying to do the right thing. Or he even says like, oh, I don't want to create a mutiny yet.
Yeah.
So he's like kind of still on his side, right?
Yeah. It's really good.
And part of that too is he promises. I mean, and it's possible. Literally, you could change any bit of history if you just change the right little thing. Because the key with this, guys, just for you guys who aren't familiar with this episode, when you go to change something, you remove it from history. So, like when they talk about removing that asteroid, they don't remove the asteroid then. They remove that asteroid in its entire existence, which 1 billion years ago it created life in a certain sector, which means you just killed billions upon billions of lives.
Oh, I love that part, that whole idea, because he allows Chakotay to he's like, why don't you mess with it? He's like, well, I think this asteroid is the problem. If this wasn't here, then we wouldn't have stirred it or steered into your space and then, messed everything up. And he's like, what if we just eliminate the asteroid? And then he's like, I didn't realize what it would create. It created life. It created planets and civilization. He's like, congratulations, you just destroyed 7,000 civilizations of 1 billion people or whatever. And it's like, whoa, that kind of thought process, it just makes me kind of hopeful, but also sad in a way of what I've seen from Marvel at this time, because they're using the concept of time and how it creates history and the future and all being wrapped up into one in such a unique way and very well thought out that I'm like, come on, Marvel, like this is out 20 years ago or 30 years ago, like let's use some of this.
Yeah. In Marvel's defense, like they've been making comic books since, before the Star Trek, but Star Trek's been making Star Trek since the 60s. And so the things that we're seeing today are stuff that's been well built over the last 60 or whatever. When this show came out, it was like, 40 years of just like, this is how Star Trek works. And a lot of the writers and even actors from the original Star Trek were on Twilight Zone beforehand. So it's a lot of Twilight Zone thinking too. And you'll see it with like the idea of like, oh, if you erase time, you might mess up something in the past that's hard. That's kind of like Twilight Zone-y. A lot of that still rings true all the way through, even to today's, like Picard just ended season 3, actually the series. And so many things were like, oh yeah, if you do this, and stuff. So it's pretty neat.
So Frank, I got a question for you because I have a theory, and I don't think they explain it in any kind of detail in the show, in the episode. But why Anorax can't restore that colony specifically? You have any ideas?
I don't know why, but we do know that when he defeated the first enemies, which he names once, I didn't write it down. They had a virus that they created immunity for. So long ago. So then his family didn't have. So it's we sadly know about it from like Native Americans and Europeans coming over. There was immunities that were created at that point that if you were to take out that situation, good for many reasons, but all of a sudden you'd have all these diseases back in a certain way. So it's like kind of that,
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I think an alien race like attacks that colony, right? But because they attack it, they spread this virus, and then that virus allows like future generations to be immune to it. And since he eliminates that race from coming in, they don't have an immunity to this virus, thus killing, I don't know, the colony or whatever, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
Plus, the way the technology works, the way it removes something, you can't add anything, I feel like. So also, like, the colony's gone, so I don't know. So I think it's that first thing they deleted that they got rid of the colony was what added the colony in the first place. So that's my opinion.
So you don't think they can undo a change that they've done?
Correct.
Like, okay, that makes sense. And once it's removed, it can't be put back and remove something else. So that's kind of what I was thinking, is like maybe his wife or the people that started that colony had a shared lineage with the enemies that he removed from the beginning. And so I'm like, okay, we'll just, bring them back and I didn't realize he probably couldn't do that. But in my mind, I kept thinking he was trying to keep his people really powerful and the enemy nearly extinguished or completely gone. And that if he was just to maybe tip the scales and his people were, second-class citizens but still healthy and living, and the other ones were the powerful dominators of the territory, maybe that would bring his people back, but he's not willing to sacrifice the power of his, of his race or whatever.
I think that's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
But I will negate that with this.
What's that?
So the first attempt, I got 98%. Not good enough. The second attempt, he says we're aiming for 52. They get 52%, and he asks, is the colony on, I forget, I wrote it down.
Keanu
of course,
Prime.
I'm looking at my notes like every time.
Yeah.
Keanu Prime back, and the guy says no. He says, keep scanning. We're going to do it again. So I think he would have been fine with 52% if the colony was back.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think it's that colony is back as his only thing. And then when he talks to Chakotay, how heartbreaking is that? Because we see in the final shot too. His wife would sleep in bed, and he would have sleepless nights while his wife is in bed, and he's sitting there designing the thing that would eventually wipe her away from existence. And it's like, how many nights could you have just slept next to your wife?
Yeah.
And
So-
that was the whole thing.
Can we jump to the very end then? Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. There's
that
no,
final
we don't
scene?
go in
Okay.
no order at all. You're fine.
So the first couple times I watched this episode, I didn't really understand that final scene.
We've negotiated this a lot, though. Dropped it in the past. Just go ahead. What you're going to say.
Yeah, and please clarify because I want to
ahead, Jeff.
know exactly what you're thinking.
So the final scene, Anorax is in his office working on these calculations to, theoretically do the first attempt again of his technology to change the timeline. And his wife comes over and talks to him and says, hey, we should go for a walk or something like that. It's really nice. He stops his work, sets down his tablet, and says, yeah, you know what, let's go ahead and do that. I think that was the change in the timeline that negated his ship from ever being built. Stopped his technology from becoming a problem in the first place. And now, he's going to enjoy the rest of his life with his family.
I think you're right. Because also what I used to have a problem with, I was like, but he's still once he gets back, he still's working on it. But he must never get it done because that change happens 200 years in the past. So it has to be a change that would have not have changed anything up to this point. So that means that for sure the ship doesn't exist because that happened 200 years ago. So I think you're right. That was the change that the time wave, for lack of a term, changed. And
Yeah.
I think you're right,
incursion.
Jonathan. I know we've talked about in the past, like, does he make it eventually when he comes back? What, he has all the time in the world,
Yeah.
you know.
So it's just
I'll say
a
that's
change
not-
of heart. Now he's, more focused on his family and less on his work. And
Yeah.
maybe he ends up passing it off to somebody else when he's ready to retire, and they
if
never
they're
finish it
unsuccessful,
too.
at least for
Yeah.
200 years.
So,
yeah.
question on that for you guys: if they had it in the beginning of the episode, of episode 1 of this, or part 1, and he finishes the calculations, it just shows him finishing the calculation. His wife comes in, asks him the same thing. He says, "No, honey, I got to finish this thing." Finishes it, and then we get to see that time getting shot down on the planet and wiping it clean. Do you think it would have made it better in any way, or do you think it wasn't necessary still?
Yeah, I don't think that's necessary. I think showing us at the end, then we can kind of infer that was how it started too. Was a different decision there.
Got it. Got it. I know. Just for me, not knowing this and just kind of having to hear what happened to him, it's like, yeah, you can imagine. And then that scene, you're like, wait, is this a flashback? Is this what's happening now? It was a little, I guess, confusing for me
It's
being that
both,
a first time watching it.
It's a
Yeah.
flashback to 200 years ago, but it is what's happening now because
Right.
at his timeline, it's exactly what happened, but he just made one switch over. So that's the alternate timeline, but actually the main timeline now.
Yeah, it seems like in this world, time is almost on, it's like a fixed timeline where you can't really, kind of like the MCU, like you can't really change it. It doesn't really like loop, or like you can't create an alternate timeline and not connect back into the main timeline. It seems like
That
everything is
being
on a
said-
main timeline.
Yeah, Star Trek has maybe one. I mean, every Star Trek has maybe one time-related episode per season. Oftentimes because it's cheaper. Because all of a sudden it's like, hey, in this episode we happen to visit the '90s, which is when the show is airing.
Right,
So
right.
and that's another thing I just love. It's such a freaking gimmick of Star Trek. For some reason, 300 years in our future, they are huge fans of the 19th century. They
Yeah.
can't get enough of 80s rock and roll and TV shows like MASH. And so
Working
like
on
even
old
like
cars. Yeah.
Yeah, Tom Paris, his big thing is that he likes to like restore old cars that happen to be from the 90s and 80s and stuff. So it's like,
Right.
I love how they just for some reason didn't work on anything past that.
Yeah. It's funny. Like me and Christina, my wife, were laughing about the whole, I learned this from the Titanic. And it was like, they're so far into the future. This is where they're going to pull the information from. But that just kind of made me laugh because I'm like, that's a reference everybody can understand.
Yeah.
But
The
I
most
do like
popular-
that they
yeah.
that they put that in the. I mean, not that it's from the Titanic, but the concept they show you in advance how this shielding system is going to work, and then just so you can get the visual later on when the ship is just almost destroyed, it's really only being held up by these bubbles of shields inside it that you can see through. So you're on the brink of space. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's the other thing too, man. When that front of Voyager gets ripped open and you see just clearly throughout. I mean, that I don't think has ever been done before. I can't remember a version of that being done. But that was like, as a Voyager fan, you're like, oh shit, this is the most real the ship's ever been in. This is crazy.
Yeah.
So I got a question. In part 2, they're coming back to actually fight the Krenim, and they also have like a bunch of extra ships. My thing was like, where did they come from?
So that time that was like, I think it was like 90 days. I have it written down. It was 27 days actually.
Yeah.
So in that time, she's going. You got to imagine, and Voyager's done this actually in another episode that's very good too. They go from. Yeah, exactly, John. They go from planet to planet, like, hey, guys, they're changing the timeline. You might be deleted next. And she
Yeah.
builds, like, a small coalition, she calls it, to try to, like, attack at one time. Giving them all the key to, and the reason that, like, Chakotay, like, used it as a bargaining chip later on. He says if she gave them the time shielding, no doubt the planet they came from has that time shielding now, too. So now there's planets you can't change anymore, which means you'll never get 100%. So
Oh, wow.
that's why he gets so desperate. He's just like, fucking kill Voyager at all costs, because he knows that if you can push Voyager out of the timeline, then none of those planets have shielding anymore, because then Voyager never existed to give those planets shielding.
But unless they're shielded already, your incursion, if it deletes Voyager, won't go through their
Well,
shielding.
that's a good point, Jonathan. That's a really good point. There it is. You're right. Shit.
What he needs to do is just
Time.
change the frequency of his weapon. But
Yeah.
that
Well,
was
yeah, I
another-
know. There's, I mean, yeah.
So one thing I listened to the Delta Flyers podcast, which has Tom and Harry, Garrett Wang and Robbie Duncan McNeil. And one thing they were talking about this episode was that this
Oh,
was
they did this one. Good.
yeah they said this was originally planned to be an entire season of Voyager.
Oh my god!
Yeah.
How cool!
Right? I mean, that would have been That would have been really fun, but maybe it would have gotten stale. It's a lot to fill
It might have
in.
been too radical, too.
Yeah, I think
Mine
it
probably
was
would have
gonna
been
be
pretty
season-
sad, right? Like, I mean, it felt like this was a very sad episode, kind of. Yeah, episodes.
Yeah.
And you're like, man, this is a bummer. Like, how are they gonna get through this? It doesn't seem possible. I don't know. I'm guessing that's not always the feeling you get from the show.
No, a lot of times it's very optimistic and inspirational and stuff.
Yeah. It's all about optimism. But I'll go into that in a sec. Did they say why they didn't do the season thing, though?
It was just the producers decided to change it, but I think what happened was because it was going to be season 4, and we see this. I mean, this is in season 4. We see that shift where they bring on 7 of 9. So I think when they were first writing it, they were considering it, during season 3 to make that the next big thing to kind of reinvigorate the show.
Okay.
And then they decided to go with the whole 7 of 9 twist with Kess and all that stuff. So it makes sense, but at the same time, it's like, man, that probably would have been cool if they were to stretch it out more.
That would have been interesting. I wonder if that would have done well. That's really interesting. Discovery, but you know what? Discovery has done that twice now, and it's not been for the better, in my opinion. So who knows?
Yeah.
But to explain that, do you have something to say, John?
Well, I was gonna say we have several cool 2-parter episodes like this too, like the ones with the what are those?
The
people?
World War II one is a good one too.
Yeah,
With
yeah, the
Herodians?
Herodians. Yeah, yeah. Prey and the other whatever it is.
The Hunter and the Prey or something. Like
Yeah.
that. But to explain that too, like the first 3 seasons weren't doing too well numbers wise, ratings wise. So after the character that everybody liked the least was this girl named Cass. She's complicated. It's not a big deal.
I thought she was a great character too. I wish they didn't have to kill her off.
They didn't need to, in my opinion, but they were kind of like finding it
Jennifer Lean.
something to pick on. So they did, and they got rid of her. They wrote her out in a really cool way. But then they brought in 7 of 9, the Borg girl. So this is her first season on the ship, and she was. And if you look at the marketing, how much it shifted, like the TV guides, it's all like, oh, look at this United crew. So all of a sudden, check out this hot babe in the sweet suit,
Yeah, she wears. Yeah, you saw the skin tight clothes. So
skin tight clothes all the
use
time.
her
So that
for
was the
all
whole
their
focus
advertising.
going forward.
Yeah.
But that character
Unfortunately.
became very deep and complex in her own right. So not to say that didn't happen, but in the beginning that was definitely the case. And so that's why John says that was a possibility for them to shift over.
And it's
See, that's no
unfortunate they had to do that change because like Kess was like a love interest with Tom and stuff, so they kind of had a romance story they were trying to play into with that. But and her and Neelix, I think, were dating for part of it.
They were in the beginning, yeah. But
yeah.
they were going through a divorce basically. That's why her and Tom was interested.
Yeah, so she was. I thought she was a good character. She was developing. She had like telekinesis or psychic abilities, and so they're really kind of delving into that a little bit. And then they decide to write her out, so her abilities kind of lead to her, separating from the ship. But yeah, 7 of 9's
Wasn't bad.
a good addition to the show, and she's kind of the segue. They have an awesome story to bring her into the show, and then she's a segue into having the Borg as a kind of a big looming enemy that's ongoing enemy, I guess. So they have to fight throughout the next several seasons.
The Borg is the Thanos of Star Trek. Like it's the biggest bad. Whenever you hear that echoey voice, or you hear about Queen, or anything like any Star Trek you're watching, if Borg is brought up, you're like, oh shit, just got real.
Yeah, They just back out. They just like whoever's
They
near
just
the
back
ship
out.
is dead. We're getting away, and they avoid him at all costs until Janeway got wise to the business, and now she's the Borg killer.
I'm watching all. Jonathan, by the way, after this one episode, I'm watching it all again. You know I am.
Yeah, right.
I can't help
Start
it.
from the beginning.
So good. So as for the optimistic outlook, the thing that I've oftentimes looked at, and not to get political, it's not really that, but Star Wars is if like capitalism was the successful one, to where like everything's all about money, everything's this. So you see a lot of individualism, but Star Trek is if like socialism and a unit became the more important thing. And so like there is no cash at all in the future with Star Trek. Like they're like in the Federation. In the Federation, yeah. So outside of the Federation, people who aren't in it, like the Ferengis, but so like it's all about like merit is what ranks you up as like your skills and your merit. And so that's why they always kind of do. The guy who invented all Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry, his whole thing was like showing off what a utopia might look like and why we should strive for it. So especially the original show in the 60s, which of course 60s had like Cold War, stuff like that. There were a lot of episodes that specifically ranked to like civil rights or to and we see it even to today. Like there's a lot of in Discovery they did an episode all about non-binary and things like that, and it's all through the guise of the future, but it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. I'm seeing that today.
Interesting. That's cool.
This episode in particular doesn't have that, which is another reason why I was like, damn, maybe I should have picked this one.
Yeah. No, okay. But that does make sense because, yeah, there's just a different vibe that I was trying to pick up on. And it's not Star Wars, but it is futuristic. Yeah. There's tech. There's some type of magical elements to it. And yeah, that makes total sense, I think, when you view it from that lens.
Yeah. It's the only sci-fi. I mean, like when you think of sci-fi, a lot of times it's like, oh, post-apocalyptic or something like that. I Am Legend. This is one of the only ones I can think of. It's like, at some point we figured it out, which we know that there's a World War III in the history of Star Trek. Mm-hmm. Like we know after World War III and we lose like billions of lives, we kind of get our shit together. So look forward to that one. But Star Trek's like one of the only ones where we figure something out and we become better people.
Was it the Millennium Gate? Wasn't that the first step Janeway's ancestor
That was,
made?
yeah, Janeway's ancestor did that, yeah.
Was it perpetual energy or something like that?
Ooh.
Yeah, it was, yeah. So, but that's the idea, that like there's this MacGuffin or whatever, like we just lean in science at some point, and then all of a sudden we become better people for it. And it's just this cool idea of like, it doesn't have to be shitty, you know?
Yeah. So. Wow, that is like extremely hopeful and like bright and just like a cool outlook. Yeah. It's like, why don't we have more of that? Where maybe things would turn out more positive. Everything now is like doom and gloom. Everything's falling apart. Everybody's in bunkers, stashing guns and Chef Boyardee. And that's kind of a nice outlook on it.
Yeah, fear and sex, that seems to be what sells.
Yeah, right.
Well, and the fandom, I think, reflects it too. I think the Star Trek fandom, Jonathan, you could probably speak to this, is generally optimistic. And like, even if you don't like a version of Star Trek, you're just like, that one's not for me, but man, let's talk about this one. And people will.
Yeah, when you go to conventions too, I haven't been to a convention where people are negative necessarily, but when you go to a Star Trek convention, everyone's just friendly and excited to be there, and there's no judgment of, you know, people's costumes and stuff like that. So I don't know, it feels like it's more optimistic than other conventions, I think.
Definitely
That's
a family.
Awesome.
And it's one of those things where it's like, if there's a new actor in a Star Trek, welcome to the Star Trek family. You can now do conventions for the rest of your life if you wanted to. And they do. Like you know, you, Jonathan, and me have met people from Star Trek at these conventions, and it's like, I mean, it's just funny how it's like, you know, now you're part of Star Trek, and you could always be a part of Star Trek. It's pretty cool.
Right. That's killer. Yeah. It seems like they have, you know, Star Trek has some of the most dedicated fans in the world. I've even seen them at LA Comic-Con when there was nobody from Star Trek speaking. What do the different colors mean in the suits, though? Because I saw red, I saw blue, I saw green. How do you differentiate it, or what do they mean?
Yeah, that changes between series as well. The different shows have a little
That's
bit
only the original series is different, Jonathan. I know Jonathan watched the original series for Trek Freaks, which is one of our best shows. But the original series, I just saw the map on this, John, is the only one that did the wrong colors. It's funny because they're the founders.
Yeah.
But after that, I went to the...
Well, Discovery has
do you want to explain the newer colors or the old ones?
Yes, and
yeah,
Next Generation...
Before the original series.
Oh, I see. Well, Next Gen had blue and not teal, right?
Yeah.
So anyways, teal...
No, it was a lighter... Yeah.
Yeah. So
I don't even know what we're talking about anymore.
Sorry.
So red is command. Yellow is science and security. No, yellow is science and security, engineering. And then teal is medical.
Okay.
Medical and something else. Doesn't include.
So, I think the yellow is actually over there. So it's engineering and security, and then science and medical is blue.
You think science is teal? Or is blue?
Yeah. Because Crusher is blue from Next Gen.
Yeah, I think he has it wrong.
Yeah.
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 I'm thinking of the sun, but yeah.
Yeah, the android guy, the holographic guy in this one, he had a green suit. Or I don't know if it's
medical.
teal, but he had it. So I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Why is his different compared to everyone else's?
It's nice when he puts on the red
ranks.
one.
And then they have like little pips. They call them pips that show like what they are. And one of the absolute coolest scenes ever is he, in becoming a human, the doctor, which doesn't have a name, he picks a name at the very finale, but doesn't have a name the entire show. He's creating these daydreams so that he can experience what daydreams are as he's evolving. And one of them is that he is needed really bad, and he becomes a captain for a moment to fight off a battle. And all of a sudden you just see an extra pip up here, which means like, I'm a captain now. And what's funny is like another alien race who's trying to spy on them, it tapped into his daydreams by accident, to where they're like, holy shit, we gotta watch out for this guy. He's like amazing.
Yeah,
He
he
keeps
activates
seducing
the
all the women
photon
on shit.
cannon. Yeah,
That photon cannon, yeah.
yeah, it's
which is, like,
Tinker,
so
Toy
made
Soldier
up.
Spy, I think.
Oh
Yeah.
man,
Yeah,
that's
it's a good
killer.
episode.
Nice.
Oh, God.
So this for you guys, I know online this ranks as like one of the highest rated Star Trek episodes. What about for you guys? Like, what's your favorite if you had to like name one, or which one comes to mind?
Yeah.
Yeah, right now because we're talking about it, this is at least in my top 5. But like I said earlier, the Hunter and the Prey are the ones with Hirogen. The Hirogen themselves now they haven't aged as well because the costume style or whatever. But the story is really good, and then Endgame is the best. So yeah, all those are amazing.
Endgame is so cool. Yeah, this is definitely top 5 for me. I would say any episode with Hirogen is good, but the one where they go to World War II, they do the World War II thing, is really cool. Like, literally, they're Nazis. I was debating about having you watch that one, but I was like, holy shit, talk about not any context while you're watching like this World War II things. Like, trust me, it's Star Trek.
Yeah.
There are a lot of really good episodes. The controversial favorite for me would be the Tuvix episode, where Neelix and Tuvok, one being transported, there was something wrong in the machine, and they accidentally get merged into one person who becomes Tuvix.
It was the type of flower that was with him.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. But so it's this new person who's made by both Tuvix and Neelix mixed together, and so he's like super smart, but he's also hella charming and just like a really nice guy. And you really start to fall in love with him, and then they figure out how to separate the two people, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, that means there's no more Tuvix, and so it's like,
And
shit,
and
loss and stuff.
Yeah, he doesn't want to die. He's like, well, if you separate me back into two people, effectively, I'm going to die, right?
Right.
I choose to live. How can you murder me?
Oh my
And people are like trying to say like he deserves to live, like so do and like they convince it basically by saying like, but think about Kes, she's missing her husband. Think about Tuvok, he's got kids at home, and
Right.
you killed them off. And it's like, oh damn. Like Neelix, there's an episode where he almost dies and he doesn't see his God, so then all of a sudden he like stops believing in his religion's God, and so it's like, I'll never see my sister again, I'll never see my family, because his family gets like, his culture has a genocide on them, so like now he's having to deal, and it's this whole thing where he's the inspiration for this little girl on the ship named Wyoming. That's not right. Whatever.
Naomi Wildman.
Naomi, thank you, John.
Yeah, no problem.
And so like now all of a sudden he's like this super solemn guy who doesn't believe in his own religion, specifically that he won't see his family again, and he has to find like this show is so fucking good.
Yeah, so at the end, he finds peace in the fact that he may never see his family again, unfortunately, but he has a new family here on Voyager in that little girl and the rest of the crew. So it's devastating,
beautiful.
but it's also, it's kind of a silver lining at the end.
Yeah, what a bittersweet kind of feeling, but man, that's some heavy stuff.
Hey,
There are heavy episodes,
we could just go back to episode 1 if you guys want to walk through each one. There's so many.
Jonathan, you bring back Trek Fix, goddammit. Bring
I
back
know.
Trek
We're
Fix.
talking,
Yeah.
every once in a while we can do them. I just, I know Kevin's never available now, and mine were hit and miss. So, but I'm down to do, intermittent episodes.
Very nice. I'll tune in, guys. Let me know.
The problem is they'll all end up long, like this one I'm sure is going to be very long, because we kind of just go off and start talking.
Off on a tangent, yeah.
Yeah.
So was there anything else specific about this episode that we didn't dive into? I can't.
Or Voyager as a
think of
whole
anything.
that you have a question for, Thomas?
Oh yeah.
Or Star
Not
Trek?
exactly anymore. I just really thought it was a cool concept to see this passage of time and then to label it, day 2, day 3. Like it, you don't really see that, I think, in shows. Like movies can sometimes do that, but I've rarely seen it in a show, and it kind of creates this feeling of like, okay, you see things progressively get worse, and you're like, how bad can this possibly be before the end? And that's like a really cool concept that I love that they play with in these episodes. Like, it was just smart writing.
Yeah, and it's interesting because as a Star Trek fan, while you're watching it, you're like, this is time travel, so it could all be fixed. But you are still seeing like the ship go to a point you've never seen it get before. Any Star Trek ship get this bad without straight up being destroyed. And
Yeah.
you're seeing some of your favorite crew members. There have been episodes in the past where like some of your favorite crew members die, but you're like, yeah, but there is like a time element to this, so we might be able to save them. And that's kind of what's going on with this, but they pushed that envelope to its max. It was something else.
Yeah. That was wild. Yeah.
All right. You want to do fun facts?
Yeah. I think we've gotten some fun facts already, but let's see what the internet has to say.
Let's add a couple more. So here's our first fun fact. This episode was nominated for an Emmy Award for Outstanding Special Visual Effects for a series. Now, I know watching it nowadays doesn't look great, but this was easily has to be like one of their highest budgeted episodes ever. I can't think of one that would be higher, more expensive.
Yeah, I can imagine that. I mean, it didn't look terrible. Like, I was kind of putting myself in the mindset of that time and, just trying to just really believe what was going on. And I didn't think it looked like pretty decent for how, I don't know, when was it, in the 90s this episode came out, or the 80s?
90s.
No, probably 95. Yeah, I think 97 was the last season, right?
Yeah.
Man, this had to be incredible for 95.
Yeah, 9. Yeah, you got me questioning that. Yeah. After leaving
Either the
Star
first
Trek,
season or last season was in 97.
yeah,
Sorry.
I think it's. I think Next Gen was last season was 97. So I think we're off by one. After leaving Star Trek, producer Ronald D. Moore used this script as an example of how Star Trek Voyager should have proceeded all along. So not only were you saying that with this season, he actually thought this should have been Voyager's future. Like they barely escaped this somehow or whatever, and it just continuously gets harder and harder for them. Do you think that would have done well?
Yeah, you
it
could
would've
go.
been I mean, it wouldn't have been the same story. Obviously, I like how it's small stories in between. Each episode's different, but it would have been interesting to see how it goes, I guess.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like it would be the debate on The Mandalorian, right? Going from like an episodic show where every episode seems like it's different and then they come together at the end, rather than like a series where it's just like problem after the problem and they're kind of just building off of each other. I don't know. Yeah, that seems like it would be a different show.
Yeah. I would have changed it too dramatically. And again, we've seen that with Discovery where they like changed the show dramatically because it didn't do so well. And all of a sudden you're like, man, I missed season 2.
Yeah, and this is no disrespect to Star Trek, but it seems like that there's kind of like a pattern there maybe a little bit. I mean, it sounds like even Picard has gone through the same thing where the first 2 seasons they're like, I guess, like it's okay. And then season 3, they're like, screw it. We're just going to give what everybody wants. And it kind of feels like a different show, but it works. Yeah.
It's the Dave Filoni effect. After that first season, you're like, now it gets good. Rebels, Clone Wars, all that. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. Let's see. Voyager's depicted as, this is the last one. Voyager's depicted as being heavily damaged in the show. To achieve this effect without lasting damage to any of the permanent sets, acrylic sheets similar to those used when the set is in storage was draped over most of the clean bulkheads and then sprayed with charcoal to look like they were the damaged bulkheads. They would do... So they did have some, if you pay attention, you can see there's wrinkled surfaces sometimes, but that's because it's just a sheet that they painted to look like it was the actual set. But all that's pinned onto the perfectly clean set underneath it.
Yeah. So from the Delta Flyers podcast, they were talking about how they would be filming on set 5 days a week. And so they were amazed that they were able to do so much damage on the set. They couldn't remember how it was done. They were amazed that so much damage could be done to the set that they use all the time and then restored by next week's recording. And a lot of times they would have to do things in segments. So they would do all of like the bridge scenes, in 1 or 2 days, and then do all of the other sets separately so that they can tear one down and then rebuild it and have it ready for the next week. But that makes a lot of sense that they were able to like cover things up and kind of make it look ugly on the surface so that they can just peel it right off.
Yeah. The Delta Flyer podcast, by the way, the name comes from the small ship that's inside of Voyager. And then Harry is a character that we didn't see much in this episode, but is very cool. And Tom, which you did see in the episode, he's the punk that gets trimped over. They host the podcast and they cover every episode of Star Trek Voyager. So if you guys like Voyager, go check out that podcast. It's done by a couple of legends.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Right on.
Let's give our quick ratings on this, Thomas. Let's hear your ratings and hope I don't hate you after it.
Okay, so it's hard now because now I have context and now things mean more. And when you're watching it, for me, if I just had a spitball, I'm like, very interesting story with like incredible writing where we get to see maybe the status quo for the crew, and then we get to see it at its very worst, to the point where, you know, blowing up the ship is the only option. They're meeting a very interesting villain who's willing to do whatever he can to try to rewrite history so he can bring back his wife, and that makes him a very compelling villain. But at the same time, you know, we're also really kind of wondering how the crew's going to get out of this. And yeah, it kind of culminates in this really crazy battle at the end where now the timeline's reset. So again, if you don't know Star Trek, I don't know if this is a great place to start, because I didn't understand relationships for characters, but after hearing more about it and getting more context, it's a pretty damn cool episode. So yeah, I think that would be an off the cuff review.
Jonathan, why don't you go ahead and give your review for it? Remember, now Thomas puts these up on IMDb and Letterboxd, whatever one you can. Yeah. So go ahead and give your review so he can make sure to get a nice clean one. So make it sound classy.
Like a rating? Because I can give it like a number rating.
A rating and a review like he just did. Yeah.
Okay. So I would say this is among the best episodes of Star Trek Voyager. Star Trek Voyager itself is, in my very biased opinion, the best series of Star Trek, which I know is highly debated, but you know, my young brain was being formed around this show, and it, you know, raised me to some extent. So it's just, it's an amazing episode that, like you had mentioned earlier, has kind of cutting edge CGI for its time. So when you hadn't seen a lot, the cascade effect over the planets, and you know, Janeway looking through the shields on the bridge as the bulkheads are ripped off, that kind of stuff was like, you know, jaw dropping when we first saw it. These deep concepts of time and how a tiny change can drastically alter the future, you know, and they portrayed it so well. And Anorax's acting of, you know, being so passionate and also believing that this time has a vendetta against him, it was just all done so well. Seeing our favorite characters who we've fallen in love with, you know, being pushed to the brink and, you know, nearly dead, eventually the ship, you know, completely being destroyed, the family pretty much being ripped apart because everyone's sent in different directions. And yeah, it's just an all-around amazing episode. So I'd give it, you know, 10 out of 10, 100%.
Yeah.
Nice.
I forget about how good Anorex's acting is in this too.
Oh,
and this is a year before he becomes Red on that 70s show.
Yeah.
Really?
He's done a lot of work too, though. I a while back looked up his filmography. I was like, man, he was in so much different stuff that you don't think about. You don't, you know, rewatch older movies, but yeah, he's a good actor.
The only thing I could say, the last thing I guess I'll say about Adarex before we hear your review, Frank, is those like little balls on the side of his head, whatever they are, like lizard-looking things. Yeah, every time my wife would come in the room, she's like, "Oh, what is that?" And she would have to leave. She's like, the aliens are something else in Star Trek.
Yeah,
that's
that's Star Trek. Yeah, there's a lot of alien races. Sometimes they just gotta glue some shit to your head.
These are the most wild ones too. Gosh.
Yeah, they really do look pretty good.
Don't try to watch the 8472 episodes.
Oh yeah, those are like
those are
straight up
rough CGI.
aliens.
Yeah. Oh wow.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, been forewarned.
All right, here we go. Year of Hell, I think, is the best example of all of the Star Trek franchise of a family being pushed to its limits. We see Voyager and its crew start as status quo and end off in destruction. Thank goodness it was a time travel episode. Let's see. NRX, I always forget the name. NRX is a pinnacle villain, one that should be revisited in the future in some form or another. And the Kremlin Empire leaves you with so many questions. One of sci-fi's greatest assets. One of sci-fi's greatest features is you leave wanting more and asking questions. And for the last 20 plus years, I've been asking questions about this episode. 10 out of 10.
Damn.
That was Jonathan and I have had discussions in the past of like, what does it mean that he left that thing behind? Will he create a thing? Or like all kinds of questions about that stuff. And that this episode's always done that.
Yeah.
So.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, it's kind of interesting. I guess now it's my turn to challenge you. And going from Star Trek into May 4th, which is next week, we have my challenge to you is Star Wars Episode 2, Clone Wars.
I love it. I love Star Wars.
That's a good one too.
Yeah. I thought it was fitting for, you know, not only is it being Star Wars Day, but we've got a lot of little tidbits talking about the Clone Wars, a lot of things that came up in The Mandalorian. What is that going to mean for the future? You know, this is where Rex starts. You know, we're getting Ahsoka. So I think there's a lot of connection here. And yeah, so we're going with Star Wars for next week.
and it's just a bunch of Jedi fighting. Like, it's just a Jedi bro. Everybody
Yeah.
hated this movie, and I'm like, you guys are crazy. You see how many Jedis there are?
I know.
That's awesome.
I know, and then the battle at the end was dope. I don't know. Maybe I remember it more fondly because I was a little kid at this time, and I went to the theater to see it, and it blew my mind. But yeah, we get to see Mace Windu using the purple lightsaber. This is sweet.
And this is, we'll talk about it, of course, but Yoda, first time CGI Yoda, and what that meant, and him fighting versus Count Dooku, and why you and B have been saying this entire time, it's time to make Grogu CGI sometimes.
At least when he jumps. Just when he
Make
jumps.
the jumps look cooler. Yeah.
Take the jumps CGI for me, all right? I'll be good with that. Yeah.
All right. Jonathan, thank you very much for joining us for this Star Trek episode.
Thank you for having me. I loved it. A lot of fun.
All right, guys. You can check out Jonathan on the Geek Freaks podcast, and he's been a longtime host on Trek Freaks. They are currently on hiatus, I'll say, and hopefully we'll come back in the future. But yeah, it's a busy life, guys. Podcasting's a lot of work. But thank you again for joining us, and then we'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.
Aloha.